did you get all of this information?
The question was, how did we get all this information? I'd like to say obsession is probably the best word for it.
A lifelong journey.
We've watched a lot of Doctor Who, and we have a podcast where we discuss the episodes and just our opinions and rate things. So we do delve into it as the show goes on, as well as going back to previous ones.
I started off as a fan in 1984, at the time when Peter Davison was on PBS. Shortly thereafter, he turned into Colin Baker, and I was like, what is going on here?
I, on the other hand, by my lovely brother in the Pickle Rick costume over there, got introduced to Doctor Who with the Matt Smith episode, A Good Man Goes to War, which was probably the worst ever episode to start on, thanks a lot, JD, because I was just confused.
Yeah, that's a bad
They brought in a lot of characters from the past, and just it was like a big reunion thing that made no sense to me.
Any other questions?
What about the doctor's daughter?
The Doctor's daughter, we considered putting her on here, but she was only in the one episode, so we weren't quite sure. This was, her name was Jenny. She kind of was born out of very strange circumstances, and the Doctor thinks she's dead, but she's really still out there traveling the universe. And we really hope that she's going to show up again and meet the current Doctor, because that would be a very interesting dynamic.
Yes.
Yeah, there's also the Doctor's TARDIS.
Yes.
Yes, in female form.
What happens to their TARDIS?
Well, the TARDIS got put into the body of a woman at some point.
I know.
And as Amy put it, you know, did you wish really hard? As it turns out, the TARDIS actually is a woman or a entity, a sentient being that does interact with him, but just can't talk or anything like that. And that's why he's always going off course and where he's not, you know, wanting to go because it takes him where he needs to go.
But he does call her sexy.
Yes.
Any other questions?
What would you say to seeing Yasmin become more of a romantic companion to her friend?
I would love. Oh, sorry. The question was, what would we think about Yasmin becoming a romantic companion to the Doctor? I would love it if that happened, as long as it didn't get like too in the weeds like it did with Rose and Martha. I think that that's the direction they should go because the Doctor's always been attracted to women.
On the other hand, I would say that since we've already done the love stories, and since River might have a problem with that, I don't know. I don't know if I'm ready. I'm not sure if I'm ready for that. But we'll see.
I heard that Rivers would maybe bringing the Ronnie back. You know, she was a scientist, and they could certainly create ways that she managed to survive on this planet.
The Ronnie was a female character, for those who don't know, that came out of the 1980s.
She was also a time lady.
Yep, she was there during the 6th and 7th Doctor era, and her first story actually was really good. She was extremely well thought out, and she was a time lady who didn't have emotions, and she just did these scientific experiments
On humans, usually.
on humans or on other beings, and so it could become almost Nazi-like in a way, but at the same time she didn't have an emotional tie to it. So
Yeah, when the Doctor would come in and say, "Why are you doing this?" she'd be like, "I don't understand the question."
and she made fun of the Master and the Doctor all the time because
They were very
just
dramatic.
they were so over the top dramatic, and she's just like, I just want to get on with my work, please. With that said, the Ronnie does carry on in the audio series that they have out through Big Finish. But to have the Ronnie come back would be an amazing thing, I think, because it would give yet another dynamic. Now, having Missy and the Ronnie and the 13th Doctor all in the same boat.
I think that would actually be perfect because really, you know, the Ronnie and the Master always had really contentious type of relationship. And it
True.
would be interesting to see, especially since Missy looks a lot like the Ronnie.
What would be even more interesting is if they made the Ronnie a male and had the other two the female.
Especially since her name means queen.
Exactly. Well, he could be a queen.
Good point.
Any more questions? Oh, yes.
I know she was also only in one episode. Can you talk a little bit about Ryan's grandma, like what role would she have played in?
Okay, so the question was, even though she's only one episode, can we talk more about Ryan's grandma?
Except she was actually in 2 episodes.
Yeah.
So actually, I'm surprised.
But
we
she
didn't have-
wasn't, you know, prominent in the
I know, but she's so current.
So Ryan's one of the current companions, and his grandma is featured in some of the stories.
She had an amazing sense of wonder that almost rivaled or surpassed the Doctor, him, or herself. So I do see what you're saying. I think she kind of embodied the one that was the adventurer, where her husband was the one who's like, no, I just want to sit back and relax, guys.
And really, it made a very powerful dynamic, because the two companions that are not sidelined in the current series are Graham and Ryan, and Graham is the step-grandfather, and Ryan was raised by his grandmother, so they butt heads a lot throughout it. And his grandma dies in the first episode while on an adventure with the Doctor, and Graham and Ryan go off with the Doctor and are trying to deal with grieving while still, having an adventure. And she was kind of set up to really be a very good companion. She was curious, she was adventurous, she was brave, and just excited by everything, and encouraged everyone to go out and, fulfill their dreams.
Unfortunately, that didn't happen, but we won't tell you why. Any other questions? Oh yes, in the back.
Couldn't make it over here for the beginning, but was Romana mentioned?
Yes, Ramona was mentioned. We did go through her.
Just for you.
I always thought it'd be interesting to have one of the bubble universe.
Oh yes, well, okay, Romana, a good question about Romana, the bubble universe, and what happened to Romana afterwards. The audio series kind of takes her storyline, because she goes off on her own adventures, and she becomes Lord President of Gallifrey herself. She's deposed as Lord President, and then comes back to the post later on in the audio series.
Which, also happened to the Doctor, but she must have been much better than he was, because he just left every time he got elected.
Yeah.
Yes, Big Finish actually has done a whole series based on just Romana and Leela, and those two are of course on Gallifrey. It gets very interesting, a little bit beyond what you probably would see in Doctor Who, but yeah, they deal with the Matrix a lot, and that just messes with your mind.
And yes, it's like the Matrix movies, but Doctor Who did it first.
Yeah.
Any more questions?
Are the Big Finish considered canon?
That's a good question. Thinking about canon, I actually did a podcast on what is canon and what is not. I think if you want it to be canon, then you are blessed with it being canon. The thing about canon is that typically people think, okay, the television series is what's canon. The problem with this is that the producers of the show in 2013 brought the 8th Doctor back on screen and had him list all his audio companions.
The other problem was in the 90s, when the show was not televised, all there was the audio and the comic books and the regular books.
Although I will say the audios didn't start till '99, so there's only a small gap between.
It was still the 90s.
Yeah, very, very small gap. But I would say yes, they are part of canon based on the TV series addressing the fact that the 8th Doctor companions are there, and because the 8th Doctor companions go off with the 6th and the 7th and the 5th Doctors as well, it all kind of comes into play.
Until there's a conflict, we just don't know.
But yeah, whatever you want it to be canon. I mean, there is no official, this is canon, it must be this way. You had a question over here.
What are your favorite female characters?
So, River was my favorite. If we're going just the official companions, I have to go with Bill. I loved how much she just took charge and figured out everything, and just really had a great relationship with the Doctor, and was awesome all the time.
I think my companion is a little bit more surprising for some people, because this was the companion I saw all of at the very beginning of my time with the show. So I actually fell in love with Perry when I was a wee lad of 11 years old. She was my first crush. But with that said, if I had to go with a current companion, I would probably, it would be a toss-up between Amy and Clara, because both of them, they were fun. They were really fun.
And they're also the two most gorgeous ones. Is that anything to
Not per se. I mean, I actually like Barbara Wright a lot too, because I like the Barbara Ian Chesterton from the 1960s dynamic. So it's not all about those.
Yes, you had a question over there.
Oh, yeah. Maisie Williams, she was also in there.
Yeah, we really debated putting her in this as well. So the question is about Maisie Williams, who plays Arya in Game of Thrones, playing a character called Me in Doctor Who. And she was very interesting because she was a Viking who was, through some extraordinary circumstances, given the power/curse of never being able to die or age. And so she lives forever and travels to everything. And she is kind of an interesting character. She ends up, running her own little societies and basically doing whatever she wants. And at the end, she runs off with Clara in Clara's new TARDIS.
So the basic idea here is don't ever ask the doctor to give you life internal. Any more last minute questions? Oh, sure.
Is there what type of companion would you like to see that you haven't? Like for me, I was really excited to see Clara from the Christmas episode, and then it was a modern day, and I was like, oh, I wanted that Victoria. Is there something like that you'd like to see that we haven't seen?
The question was, is there a certain type of companion we haven't seen that we would like to see? I would actually like to see, yeah, you made a good point. I would like to see some more companions from the past, because they would have more surprise and everything. But also, I'd like to see more alien companions. To kind of, especially if it was an alien and a human, were both companions at the same time, I think that would make for an interesting storylines.
I think that what would really be fascinating is if you actually brought an actual famous person on board the TARDIS. They did actually have an episode back in the 1980s that wasn't quite successful, but it had H.G. Wells in it. And it would be fascinating to actually see what would happen if they brought someone like, I don't know, name an author that would probably be good.
Agatha Christie.
Okay, well, yeah, she was already on the show, but I mean, like C.S. Lewis or somebody that would get someone that would get inspired to write, or someone that would be inspired by what they saw out in the universe to do what they go on to do. That would be fun. That would be very fascinating.
I think it'd be great to have Frobisher back because he was a giant penguin, but
Frobisher was a shape-shifting comic book character who's also made it into the audios.
But he was mostly a giant penguin.
He was mostly a giant penguin.
In Star Trek, for example, we have a number of characters that are alien-human hybrids. I don't know that we've had anything like that in Doctor Who, and if not, then how would that be interesting?
The question was, have there been any alien-human hybrids in Doctor Who? Now, Leela was technically a human, and she does marry a Time Lord who's a different species. So if they had, and they do have kids, according to at least some books. So I guess there would be that, but it wasn't televised. So.
There are no televised companions that were crossbred, but there are alien and possibly crossbred aliens from the audios and the novels. But yes, I agree that would be fascinating. The problem with that, I think, is that you have all those things to put on. And so we're talking about the BBC. It's not like Star Trek where they have an actual budget. They do unfortunately have to think about that.
Yeah, but they also have Madame Vastra, who's been in a lot, and she's got some spectacular makeup going.
Yeah, I just don't think she could be there for the whole series.
Well, Mr. Spock only has, 20 years.
It's a good point.
Yeah, I know.
And I think if there were to be a human-alien hybrid, it probably would come from Captain Jack Harkness. Yeah. You guys aren't paying those down there.
They also, the other problem is that I think when you have an Earthling, it kind of brings it back home to the people that are here on this planet. So you know how they're feeling and what excitement they're going to have and all that good stuff.
It also helps with all the doctor's explanations being geared towards someone who has the same experience that we do.
Exactly. I think there was one more. Yep, right there.
I was thinking that River kinda is a human Time Lord.
Oh, that's a good point.
Yeah.
River is kind of a Time Lord human hybrid. She was conceived by two humans in the time vortex.
Which doesn't make sense.
And this other society grabs her and does some sort of weird science on her to make her more Time Lord-esque, and she does regenerate twice, so.
Again, it just doesn't make sense.
It doesn't have to make sense, she's amazing.
Oh, I don't deny that. Back there, yes.
Yeah, I love Clara, but I'm always confused by her. I see her first as a Victorian lady, then she comes back as a fully modern woman. I would have found her much more interesting had she remained a Victorian in her whole time, because that would produce an interesting dynamic, a 19th century person thrown into the, weird future. What exactly was the deal with Clara? How did she go from Victorian lady to modern? I've never understood that.
Okay, so the question is, Clara, how was she Victorian and modern? There was actually even one beforehand where she was from the future and she got converted into a Dalek. And that one was quite tragic. And then, yes, the Doctor met her in Victorian times and she died again. And then met her in modern times. And I agree with you that it probably would have been more interesting if he had continued with the Victorian times one. But as we mentioned earlier with Clara saving the doctors throughout his timeline, what happened was that she ends up going into the Doctor's timeline to rescue him because one of the villains went in before her, and she gets shattered into gazillion pieces and spread out across his timeline. So there's different pieces of her and different people that live their own lives as her and meet and rescue the Doctor throughout. So when he met her in the Victorian times and when he met her in the Asylum of the Daleks, these were those different sort of fractured versions of her. And then when he met her in modern times, that was the original that ends up in her own future going on to do that and to go back in time.
Timey-wimey.
It's also why the Doctor thinks that she's hiding something from him and she doesn't know what he's talking about.
Yeah, I was totally confused by her. I see her as a modern school teacher and as a Victorian lady. What the heck's going on?
Some people had the same thought. All right, well, we have 5 minutes, so we can take maybe 1 or 2 more questions, or if you have any other thoughts, or no? No? Oh, there we go.
So you commented on this current Doctor gets no epic speech and it's some of her storyline are a little bit long. Do you think it had to be things that were only to do with the fact roles and her now she has friends instead of companions or assistants? Do you think that the writers, she's a woman.
So the question was, why do we think that it's happened that she, being the first woman, has also gotten less epic speeches and the like? I think it's really because they also changed the head writer at the same time that they changed over the cast. So we had Stephen Moffat before, and now we have Chris Chibnall. And Chris Chibnall is really good at character pieces, but less good at plots. But he actually specifically only auditioned women for the role of the Doctor for this, which was an interesting decision since he wanted to encourage diversity but excluded men. So I think it has something to do with that. I'm hoping that she gets some more of that next season.
I think they're trying to take a different approach, because you gotta make a Doctor different from another one. Now, it would be nice, there are certain Doctor qualities, and I think one of them is the epic speech, but I don't think you need it in every single episode. As a matter of fact, sometimes the more epic dialogue happens to be very quiet, subtle, and more contained. And so they may have been basing this Doctor, just her incarnation, as someone who's not going to go around spewing all these words like some of the male, more chauvinistic Time Lords, and made her more of a time lady. Now, I don't know if that's what they were thinking of doing, but that's what it seems like they've done.
Well, and another thing too is that they also, Chris Chibnall made the decision to not bring back the old villains, although he did bring back the Daleks, thank goodness, in the New Year's special. But so they were all new, which was good, but it also was bad because you needed to explain what they were each episode, so that left less time and there was no ongoing relationship there for her to reference. So that could have been part of it as well. But we've also seen that Missy really didn't lose many of her characteristics as the Master, and the epic speeches were kind of a fundamental part of the Doctor.
Definitely. I think that was, you want to say one more thing?
Could you, sorry, 2 questions, nobody else is asking. Could you characterize the relationship between River and Amy? I know that theoretically River's her daughter, but they have a curious relationship. How would you describe the relationship?
Okay, so the question was to describe the relationship between River and Amy.
Well, first you have to realize that Amy and River were ripped apart when River was born.
Right.
So I think that's, and then Amy didn't know where River was, or necessarily even who she was, for most of the time that she was on board the TARDIS.
Well, so also an interesting thing is when they first started filming this, Alex Kingston, who played River, was the only one who knew who she was. In fact, nobody knew who she was until the day they filmed the scene where she revealed it, and she told them like 5 minutes before they filmed it. And the only direction that Amy was given, or Karen Gillan was given for those scenes was just that you're not jealous of River. There's just no jealousy there. Because Amy kind of has a thing for the Doctor, and she's just not allowed to be jealous of River, so they cut that out entirely. But other than that, she was acting and expecting it to just be, this is just another person.
There's a weird comment where Amy realizes I'm his mother-in-law.
Yeah.
That was awkward.
There is. So the other thing was that also River, as a child, comes and meets Amy and Rory as children, and they grow up together, not realizing that they're hanging out with their own daughter. So complicated, I guess, to put it in a word.
Timey-wimey again.
All right, and speaking of time, we are out of time.
And thank you all for coming. If you have any more questions, you can also meet us in the hallway.
And you can email us at thewhovianreview@gmail.com.